design was endorsed, and then took it to our public committees, Transit Services Advisory Committee, a Citizens Transit Advisory Committee, within the two subcommittees for the Metropolitan Transit Commission, which led to our recommendation to the full Metropolitan Transit Commission just last Tuesday with our staff recommendation of the concourse design option. And on the next slide, we put that in front of them to be selected as the locally preferred alternative. That was supported and adopted by the Metropolitan Transit Commission. And with that adoption now, we have clearance to continue to move forward with some of the critical processes. Next step for us, which would be the environmental studies required as a part of the RAISE grant, the federal funding that's being a part of this full funding partnership. And then also begin additional conversations with us on the planning side, looking at the temporary transit center. On the next slide, I think there's a graphic that goes in a bit more detail to show what we're thinking for the temporary site. We talked about the temporary site and mostly in concept that it would be across 4th Street on property owned by the developer. We will begin more in earnest with, now that we have a design approved and that we can move forward with, now we can begin more appropriate planning for what are the route changes that are going to happen with that temporary site. It will also be a reduction in the number of bays, somewhere between 14 to 16 bays on the temporary site there. What will be important is, like, as we're thinking about the temporary site, is that as much as possible, come up with a route structure that allows us to move seamlessly within that permanent facility, so that the big change will be with the temporary site. We'll have public outreach, conversations with our communities, because it will be a shift and change of how our routes come into Uptown. There'll be a service equity analysis that'll be accompanied with that, and public outreach to communicate those changes. So that'll be one of our next pushes in the coming year, along with the environmental processes that we have to follow. And with that, I'll hand that over to Tracy to begin, unless there's any more questions for me.
So Jason, can you go back to the temporary site? We did not get that in our PowerPoint.
Yeah,
So
we'll make sure you get that.
a couple of quick. So just orientate me, I see 4th Street. So where's the current transit center?
So on the upper right of this image where it says future development, that's the current transit center location. And then across 4th Street, bound by the rail line, Bavard and 4th, is where the temporary center would be located. With a proposed road connection connecting 3rd and 4th to help with the flow.
Okay. And so how many bays will be at the temporary? You said there'll be a reduction?
So it'd be similar to what's they'll be in the permanent facility, which is 14 bays. So we are, looking where we can fit maybe additional 1 or 2, but I would, 14 to 16 bays on the temporary site.
Okay. And what is the construction schedule?
So first, we got to get through the complete route planning, service equity analysis, complete all our environmental clearances. This would be sometime in 2024, but we need to calendar year 2024. But if we can, once we get better ideas of our processes, we can come back with a more refined timeline for that.
And expectations of construction will be completed when?
So for the temporary center?
Yes.
So if we make the move later in 24, we would, potentially be there in 25. But I think as we continue through this process, we can continue to refine the process as we go forward.
So construction is only going to take a year for the temporary site? Is that what you?
Well, so you have to build the site, then demo the other one. Once the other one's demoed, then we can move into the temporary site. Okay. But the site is not completely 100% ready for a temporary transit center. So it needs to be level, it needs to be ADA compliant. So there's a lot of site work that has to occur at the current site. If you recall, it has 2 different levels to it. It's currently used for parking, so that would have to be completely graded and ready for a temporary site in order for it to put the amenities in place.
And then are we going to put an RFP out on the street for the temporary site, or have we selected a GC already to build a temporary site?
So that is a part of the conversation, I think, going forward with our current development team to coordinate.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So I would just note the questioner is Councilmember Mitchell, who joined the meeting, and Committee Member Mitchell, who joined the meeting.
Thank you, sir.
Welcome. And also Mayor Pro Tem Winston is now here. Welcome. Good. I think now you can go ahead.
Thank you, Councilmember Driggs. We can go to the next slide. There was also a lot of questions as we talked about the CTC development about how did the Hornets component fit into this. And so in ED committee today, we're going to go a little bit in a deeper dive of how the Hornets component works into this project, but I did want to give you a little bit of overview so that you all saw the relevance to this. Next slide. As you know, when we went through the work with the Hornets, taking the practice facility out of the arena was something that was very important to them, and having a new practice facility. That is part of what extended the lease and our investment with them. So what you see here in the purple is kind of what we've been looking at, is how the practice facility would just slide into the development on top of the parking. It almost acts as an anchor tenant, if you will. So just to be clear, CTC doesn't have to have the practice facility in it. We think it makes for a better district opportunity to have all of this integrated, but it's more acting as the anchor tenant. We've also said that as we've looked at it, that we have a plan B if for some reason CTC did not move forward as a project, or that as we got into design of the practice facility, it did not fit in the overall development. And so that is part of the process that we're going through now, is how does the design fit into the overall CTC development. If we can go to the next slide. Here you'll see just a little bit of the 2 levels of the PEC and what we've looked at. What you will see is on the image on the left, in the floor plan, the courts are kind of in the middle between 2 towers that would go above it, which is how it kind of is able to fit into the larger development of the site. And the practice facility, we go to the next slide.
If I could just interrupt.
Sure.
Ms. Johnson has a question.
Yep.
Ms. Johnson? Ms. Johnson, do you have a question?
Yes, I had a question during the last segment, but I'll wait. Thank you.
Okay. So if you see, the way that we've been looking at the design of the practice facility is in comparison to what's in it and how it compares to other facilities across the country. So we've looked at Chicago, Philadelphia, Atlanta, Milwaukee, just to see how it fits into, again, other comparable practice facilities from a square footage, as well as what's inside of the practice facility. Again, we're in that design process now, and that's running a parallel path with the design process that we are going with the CTC and the transit component of that. Next slide. So part of why we think this is really interesting is that I go back to conversations that I was having several years ago, where we were talking about improvements to the arena. We were talking about CTC and some concerns around public safety that were happening there, concerns around Epicenter and public safety there. And what we've really worked into is this great district opportunity, not from just from a revenue standpoint, which I'll come to that point, but this is a real opportunity to implement something that has been thought of, with Brevard being a festival street, that's in the Center City 2040 plan. It's been in area plans going back, I want to say, as far as the 90s, of what could we do with this portion of Uptown. And so we think that between the arena improvements as well as the CTC redevelopment, that there's this great opportunity to create this district and really be a catalyst for some new development. The opportunity really is thinking about how we can work with top corporations and institutions to make community impact, creating this community gathering place. You saw in the cross-section of CTC where now with the bus being underground, the retail really has an opportunity to flow out onto Brevard Street and create this really unique place. Then also activating the plaza that sits on the Spectrum Arena side of Trade Street. And so we think that there's a great opportunity to create more synergy around these 2 developments, as well as tap into a new revenue source with district naming rights, the PEC naming rights, and founder partner naming rights. And again, I'll go into a little bit more detail of this in the ED committee, because that structure for the revenue component of it is really about how do we pay for the practice facility. But we think that the district, I just want to emphasize, the district in the place that we're trying to create is really important, I think, with CTC in the arena. Next slide. And when I start to talk about the district, think about it in this way. We have improvements to the arena. We have the CTC redevelopment, which is across Trade Street, you'll see in there. And then between 3rd and 4th Street, you see Phase 1 and Phase 1B. I think there's a great opportunity to continue the development around down to or along the rail trail, as well as at the corner of Trade and Brevard, where you have Phase 1B. You also have the Moxie Hotel that's currently under construction right now. So again, there's this synergy that we have a unique opportunity to really capture to create this great place along the rail trail as well as along Brevard Street. If you remember where you see the convention center called out there, we also have that new development where we just did the land swap that would also also be on the rail trail. So now, just like we saw development along Brooklyn Avenue or Brooklyn Village Avenue in the last cycle, we think there's a great opportunity to create some real synergy here along the rail trail with some of these new investments. Next slide. Here, I think we have a video to show you just of how some of this can come together. Do we have a link? We're almost done. So that shows you a little bit of, sure.
Ms. Johnson. All right, so we'll continue. We'll get to questions after. Thank you.
So the video shows you a little bit about the elevated experience we think for the transit rider, but also how that street level can start to activate between the CTC development as well as the arena. Now, moving into next steps, we want to remind you of the MOU framework. We've talked about this is not new, the public funding for transit at CTC, and kind of how we are looking at building our way to roughly what we anticipate is the 89 million. Jason mentioned the advanced planning. As we do that, we'll start to refine our numbers as we get further into the planning and design. Next slide. Also part of the MOU framework, though, is the developer acquiring the land for the existing CTC. The city would own the transit facility. We would have an agreement to construct the bus facility on the adjacent property, as Jason mentioned. We'll have an exclusivity clause. I think we need to extend it beyond the 6 months. It'll take longer to design. 6 months is really too short. But again, just showing that exclusivity that we would then have with the development team. And again, the MOU would be non-binding in nature. And if we go to the last slide, we'll show you some of the steps that we have to go through and the ongoing dialogue that we'll have with you as well as the public. Jason, you want to add anything about the NEPA process?
No, as stated with the funding mix, we have, the RAISE grant that requires us to go through, the thorough process of an environmental review that'll be conducted throughout this year. And then the route planning that we discussed earlier that needs to occur, service equity analysis. We got to go through and make sure that there are no undue impact to our riders and try to mitigate that as much as possible.
So we talked about the preliminary design. Council approved 2.9 million back in August for design. Again, we'll do the MOU. We'd like to move towards the MOU. And then as we're doing the design, again, that allows us to refine our numbers. And we would then come back with a joint development agreement, which is the binding agreement. You will see a rezoning that we've just filed between the two parcels, again, to get everything in alignment. And then we really wanted to ask today are what are the other questions that we have not covered for you all as you contemplate moving the CTC project forward?
Okay, so, Ms. Johnson, would you like to ask your question now?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I just wanted clarification for the audience. The first presenter, and I'm sorry, I don't remember your name. I'm sorry, but mentioned a concourse design. So I wanted to clarify for the public if that was the below ground design. I know Ms. Dotson mentioned it, but I think in moving forward, we just want to be very clear on our decision in case someone hasn't watched previous meetings. And also, I wanted to know what will happen with the leases for the current tenants of the CTC. Will they have first right in the temporary facility, or what's going to happen with their leases? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. This is Jason Lawrence with CATS. I did the first part of
Jason.
first part of the presentation. So in reference to your first question, yes, the concourse design concept was the kind of below grade option that was presented through the public and to this body and to the Metropolitan Transit Commission, which was approved by both boards. And then your question about the leases, the current leases with the current Charlotte Transportation Center, there's an understanding and in those leases that if that facility needs to be demolished as a part of this development, that there's understanding those leases would end with that demolishment of that facility. And there's no retail component to the temporary transit center.
Thank you, Jason.
Is that it? Is that it, Ms. Johnson? Yes, Mr. Graham?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks staff for the presentation. Jason, the temporary facility, how much work are we going to put into it, right? Obviously, there won't be any retail. We're not going to build a fancy, expensive building. So what is it going to look like for the general public once we transfer to that site?
So there'll be, we'll need our ongoing operations staff to be included with that. So that'll be our safety and security needs, technology needs, customer service space, driver space for like break rooms, the management on site. So, think about the operations that CATS needs to operate transit center would have to be included with that. And so there'll be a level of programming that will occur throughout the coming year. But then as far as like for amenities for our customers, there will be coverage area, not completely covered like the CTC, but we'll have cover around the bays where the buses are coming in.
Have we established a budget?
So in the financial framework there, you see with the 12 million, that's a part of the CATS component to the overall transit center redevelopment, that is going towards the development of that site and for the amenities on that location.
12 million? Okay, and then once the temporary site has completed its mission, what happens? We tear it down?
So there'll be, we're still working out the details of the elements that are in there. Could they be reused? Are they like temporary, kind of like trailers? Think about the Greyhound facility that's in place. Can we reuse those in other spots? Could those like shelter components be reused throughout our own like bus stop amenity program? And so those are conversations we're having at this moment.
Just to emphasize something that Jason is saying that's been really important to us is that the level of service that's provided to the CATS riders can't be compromised in that time. But how can we effectively plan and most efficiently plan that we're not putting 12 million out there that then, just works for a short period of time?
Yeah.
And so we're trying to be very creative in the design and how we think about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was the
right.
gist of my question, right? We certainly want to invest in the temporary facility so that we can take care of our customers, the end users, but at the same token, if we're going to tear it down a year and a half later, with scrapping $12 million. So it's a delicate balance between the two. So I just want to get council to be aware of that, right? We don't want to lose that.
That'll be a part of the design process of that temporary facility, continue to bring you all updates as we map out that strategy.
Okay. And then my second question relating to design is the design of the new facility. Now that we've made the decision to go underground, and it's more of a comment than a question, right? I just caution that the end is in the beginning. So as we begin to design this thing, that we really, really do it with the end users in mind. I think we talked about when this facility is done, that hopefully all the buses will be electrical buses versus diesel buses. If that's a part of what we're doing. But certainly the design, and I'm very interested in that, to making sure that the customer experience is one that not only the customer experience, but the experience for our bus drivers, et cetera, is one that they can enjoy. So I will be taking a lot of look at how we design this facility. Is there actually parking there as well? So there'll be parking there.
Yeah, the parking will have to support the uses above on
Okay.
it as well. So-
And there'll be for the usage above, but it won't be public parking. It'll be parking for those who utilize the facility, i.e. Hornets maybe, or,
The Hornets will have,
Tenants in the
Tenants.
building.
yeah, tenants and the Hornets, yeah.
okay. And the other questions, they're more ED related, so I will wait until this afternoon to propose those questions to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Did you have one, Mr. Mitchell?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And staff, I guess, I'm excited about the CTC project, but I do have a couple of questions, Tracy, to your point. I'm saying let's move forward, but just so I'm comfortable, who's the architect who's designing let me rephrase it different, staff. Is the same architect who's designing the temporary site is designing the permanent site, or we have two different architects?
Well, yeah, I don't think we've determined who's doing the temporary site yet. Yeah, I mean, we have, the development team is using Perkins and Eastman to do the CTC site.
Okay.
And if you remember, just to be clear with everybody, we're approaching this as a team, right?
Right.
I mean, it doesn't make sense for us to have separate architects.
right.
It needs to be an integrated design.
Right.
But we also do have a team from an engineering standpoint, as well as a financial standpoint, that's cross-checking everything that we're doing.
Okay.
And then we have a separate architect that is working with us on the practice facility.
Okay.
Because that's really working with us in the Hornets
Okay.
piece of that.
So Perkins and Will is for the permanent site. We have no one right now for the temporary site, or is the goal to use Perkins and Wills for both? Just have that continuity?
I think that because of the integration, it probably makes it easiest to have the same.
Okay.
But that's something that we probably just need, once we can get past some of these open items
Right.
and really start to get into the design, that we can look at.
And Jason, I just want to make sure we very, much as we can, be very clear to the public on the construction schedule of the
Yeah.
permanent site, because we don't want to give false expectations. So and if we need to do it the next meeting, I'm okay with that, but I do think having that construction schedule when we propose to start and finish will be very helpful, because you're talking about disruption once again and some of the bus routes, and I just want to be clear. So you want to just bring it back in March? I don't want to put you on the spot. I'm okay with March.
Go ahead.
Well,
You had indicated completion in the 2028, 2029
Yeah,
timeframe,
that's
right?
right, yeah.
And I think really, as we're working with all of our partners here, is we've got to get through some of these points.
Okay.
And that's what I explained to the Hornets, right? Is like, we've got to get through some design, we've got to get through some of this so that we can really start working in earnest
Got it.
on the project, really lock in what the steps are going to be and what the timeline is going to be.
So then, Mr. Chairman, you said 2028,
Well,
2029.
we had heard
That is-
previously that we were looking at something like a
Yeah,
2028, 29
To have
timeframe.
completion.
For completion.
For completion.
Yeah,
Okay.
because the point was that if we didn't take these steps now, that date would move further out.
Okay. And let me follow up a question, though, Councilman Johnson said. I just want us to be a little sensitive. So we have how many businesses in the temporary site? I mean, how many businesses are currently under contract at the current location?
I don't have that exact number off the top of my head at this moment, but we can get that for you all.
Do you think it'd be in our best interest, though, that once we go to temporary site, to maybe offer them an option, that once the permanent site is rebuilt, to allow them to come back I mean, have there been any, I just don't want our small businesses to be impacted that they had a great location, and for us not to offer them to come back in a permanent just doesn't strike me right, that we terminate your contract, we're going to say bye-bye, we're going to build something new, we're going to draw more people, but we're not going to allow you the opportunity to come back. It has,
Well, what I would say is I think that we would have a full retail plan
right,
as what we're trying to build out with the new retail opportunities and things like that. That's something we can look at based on who the tenants currently are and things like that.
yeah. Just give me a list, I'm
Yeah,
just
sure,
curious.
absolutely.
Because I know we approved a contract extension on one company, so I'd just be curious how many businesses are there, and thank you for being kind of a little sensitive that we would like to try to, if we can offer them opportunity to come back. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Winston, did I see your hand move?
Yeah, I think part of my question has got answered. The final completion is expected 2028, 29. Is that the entire, will, like, for instance, the new CTC, will that only go live once all the vertical construction is complete? Or is there a staggering of?
We can bring you back a more detailed structure, but it depends on the uses above, right, that we're looking at. Depends on how the timing of those uses would be delivered. But the goal is not to have a decade-long construction project. The goal is that you're bringing in something, you're delivering it kind of all as one.
Okay. And the current, contract or partnership with the Hornets runs through 2045? Is that correct?
That is correct. The lease extension was to 2045.
Okay.
And so then we would tie the PEC timing to that 2045 as well.
Bought and paid for.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you.
Ms. Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to double back on Councilmember Mitchell's points and my question as well. I think we should be intentional about those small businesses. This is something that happens with gentrification. When an area is blighted, you know, those business owners that are supporting a location are there. But then when there's some attention and improvement and revitalization to an area or a structure, then the other ones, those businesses that have been sustaining these places are priced out. So I really, as a council, we need to think about this from an equitable perspective, these small businesses, and take a look at their leases. Because I know that we just signed a 5-year lease with some business, and I don't remember, you know, who that was. But I'd like to see a list of the businesses, maybe how long they've been there, if they're in good standing, and you know, and I know that's really getting into the weeds, but those are important details and how those unintended consequences happen because council's not taking a look at that. So I think this is an opportunity for us to support the small businesses that are there and maybe give them first right of refusal and maybe a graduated lease or something, but we need to look at this from an equitable perspective because this is what happens in gentrification and revitalization when those small businesses are priced out of places once the city or the developers start taking a look at these projects that have been, you know, unmanaged. I don't want to say unmanaged, but have been status quo for years. Thank you.
Okay, I had a couple of questions. I assume that the transition to the temporary facility and then back to the new facility is seamless, right? There's no interruption in bus service. Will the temporary facility accommodate our current kind of schedules and because it's smaller, right, than the existing one? So how do we affect the transition? Will there be a change in schedules?
Reduction in the number of bays, but it's consistent with our decentralization. Reduction in the number of bays, but it's consistent with our decentralization that we've been doing for the past couple of years with Envision My Ride. So we would time some of the changes with Envision My Ride, with, accommodating transfers at other light rail stations, at other transit centers that we have, because we have Eastland, Rosa Parks, and South Park, all as transit centers. So it'd be thinking about all of those types of centers in context with one another to develop a route network that can support the temporary center and then seamlessly move into the permanent facility. So certainly there'll be some changes to routes, but it's consistent with our adopted
So
plan.
basically, we need to make the changes that we were going to make for the permanent facility.
Correct.
At the time that we go into the temporary facility, right? We need to be ready then with the bus service that will work later as well.
Yeah, that's right.
I noticed watching the video, this great open space going down. When we did talk about the design, one concern was security. So where in that kind of path are the gates that restrict access or control who comes and goes down there for safety? There were some doors that opened, I noticed at one point, but is there some place where you actually have to prove you have a ticket, or, are we limiting access to make sure that it's safe?
You identified something that we heard a lot from our operators and from our customers during the public outreach, a desire to have, if you're in that space, that you have a ticket to be in that space at the transit center. And so the video you're seeing was early concept. I think as we continue to move through design and continue to refine those elements, we can better demarcate where those gates and other kind of ticket-controlled space can be, or will be.
Yeah, and in that video, just to add, I think it was hard to see, but it was where they had it was at the top of the escalators, and then again, as you got down there into the bus bay area. But again, to Jason's point, we're early in design on that.
And you mentioned the convention center. There is a Paseo concept. Does that join up on the rail trail, or does that integrate with this? Do you know what I mean? There was a piece of the deal that we did with the land swap and so on, where the private developer would construct that concourse, that outdoor space.
So that space was more connecting between, it was more of the middle of that mini block, if you will, that was
Right.
created.
Yeah.
That was connecting between MLK and the Convention Center Plaza.
Okay.
But to your point, it would all connect via the rail trail. And so you
Right.
have this really great opportunity where, I kind of refer to it as we haven't really embraced transit in Uptown and seen the development along the rail trail and along the transit line like we have in South End. And so with the exception of a couple of sites, here's a great opportunity now to have a catalyst that starts to serve as that and really have this great rail trail and development along the transit line that can open up to the street level as well as the transit.
Okay, so committee members, there is going to be a conversation this afternoon as well on economic development. So some of my questions that relate to the terms of the deal with the Hornets and the naming rights, I think we can discuss then. What we're looking at right now is kind of the transit aspects. I will mention one thing that I have discussed with you, which is, in my mind, this is sort of a mixed transit and economic development project, to the extent that we are seeing the creation of this new district. But when it comes to the funding, I would still like us to consider the possibility that as a sales tax is approved and we have that revenue source, that we consider refinancing some of this general fund debt or the general fund obligation through the new sales tax, which is a transit tax, because to me that's kind of properly where it belongs, or at least part of it does. We can't do it now because CATS doesn't have more capacity than is already in this cap structure. But I would certainly like to see us consider that we then refinance a portion of it so that we free up capacity in our general fund where we have a lot of demands, and we're thinking hard about how we can keep up with the city's other obligations. So I think that's the last thing I would mention.
You mentioned the rezoning, needed to rezone. Do we know what zoning district the new CTC will have, or?
I believe it's Mud-O, but they're also still considering the UDO districts as well. So I think it's just a placeholder for now as they evaluate it.
So we submitted it prior to the February changeover?
Yep, but I think they're looking at both scenarios.
Okay, and the reason I asked was, I'd like to know about the parking minimum status
Okay.
on that parcel.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Mitchell?
Mr. Chair, I do have one question related to the Hornets, if I may. Trace, you gave me this last time, so I apologize, but our agreement with the Hornets that the practice facility would be ready what year?
The goal that we have is 2028.
2028, okay, thank you. And I notice how you say go, gotcha, 2028.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So, committee, you see at the bottom there a suggestion for a committee action. Basically, we need to kind of advance this in steps. And at this point, I think we need to provide to staff our support for to negotiating the memorandum of understanding, which is non-binding at that point, with the understanding that the final agreement will come back to us. We'll also talk about the naming rights, I think, separately, so there will be a couple of other actions. But this committee, as suggested up there, should refer to City Council to authorize the city manager to negotiate and execute an MOU. So basically, unless there are other questions, I'm wondering if I have a motion for that. Yeah, okay, a motion and a second. Any comment? All in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, that's unanimous, so, good. Yeah, great, moving ahead. I think it's very exciting. We have some things we still need to talk about. And the key thing to understand here, too, is we have now, based on the information that we have, said go ahead. So later on, we will have a chance to look at the development agreement, but that is not a new opportunity to open up again questions that we have considered now. Like we need to understand that we are a go at this level, and only if there's something in the joint development agreement that we didn't anticipate or couldn't foresee at this level would we then say, well, maybe not to that one. So it is another opportunity for us to weigh in, but it doesn't sort of restart the whole conversation. Okay. I have an interesting development here. Apparently, the bus operator union contract is done, so people will know that we went through a very extended process in which the manager of our bus system negotiated with the union for the drivers on the terms of a new contract. And for a long time, we were unable to achieve an outcome. There was a suggestion, an intention of the union to go on strike. We had a 30-day window from the time that was first voted on, and now it appears that within that window, a contract has been agreed. So, Mr. Cagle, would you like to tell us about that?
Yes, sir, and thank you for asking about it. We're really excited about the developments that came over the weekend. I think you've seen that there was a tentative agreement reached last week. It was voted on and ratified by the union on Saturday. It was, in the union's word, 20-to-1, factor of 20-to-1 in favor. The actual voting was roughly 200 in favor, 10 opposed. So very successful. We are still waiting on some of the exact details of the agreement that was approved, but RATP Dev assures us that the union is satisfied and they are satisfied. There are pay increases included in this agreement. There are also some modifications to pension and scheduling that benefit the operators. There is also a component to allow for back pay to the operators. As you mentioned, this contract has been under negotiation since roughly July, so they will be able to be back paid for the period of negotiation. And there is also, as we understand it, some modifications to the number of allowable unscheduled absences. I think you'll recall about a year ago, we had, Mr. Lewis had some conversations with council about the previous contract. The number of allowable unscheduled absences has been reduced, so better accountability, better pay, we believe better benefits. We think that this is good, and clearly we thank the Smart Union and RATP Dev for negotiating in good faith and bringing this home and avoiding a strike.
And we were briefed in the context of criticism, frankly, of the bus system about these routes not being filled or staffed properly. And the CATS has been through a lot through COVID and other issues that other cities are experiencing as well, of drops in ridership and so on. So I think this is an important step towards kind of moving on with the other actions we want to take in order to move towards this new, Envision My Ride system that is intended to address a lot of the concerns that we've seen in the media and have heard from riders as well. Mr. Graham.
Yeah, thank you for the update, and I'm excited about it for the end users, the riders. But as a practical question in reference to the council, I keep hearing RT Dev, I've never met them, never met a representative of them, don't know the relationship they have with the council. Will there be at the appropriate time where they would come and make a yearly presentation to the council in terms of their goals, their objectives, and what they're doing for us? And when does their contract expire?
Yes.
And will we ever have a presentation based on the information that the manager did months ago relating to transit that was given to us in December?
Yeah, so several questions in there. Let me see if I can hit on all of them. First is the current Bus Operations Division, or BOD contract, right, which RATP Dev holds, expires. It is on its final year. That contract expires in February of 2024. We literally, within the next 30 to 60 days, will be issuing an RFP for a new Bus Operations Division provider. RATP Dev may or may not propose on that, but we expect some competition in that RFP, and we'll be making the selection and then making the transition plan ahead of February of 2024. That contract, once we move through the RFP process, will need to come to City Council for approval. The second element, which I think maybe is more important to your question, I agree, RATP Dev, to my knowledge, they don't routinely present to City Council. I don't know that they ever have.
No, not in my time.
We can certainly talk to them about that and work with them on that. And as we go into the next contract, having it more transparent for the council to see their challenges, their successes, and their challenges as they partner with us to provide the service. One thing that we're not sure of, so I mentioned the things that are included in the new collective bargaining agreement. While we're not a party to those specific things, we pay the bill, right? And so where the rubber meets the road is as they bargain for higher pay or those kinds of things, that means that the contract costs in total to the city go up. We need to evaluate with RATP Dev what the cost of this new contract is, and then we'll have to determine, does that require city council approval? And even if it doesn't, we may want to bring this to TPD or to the full council to share with you the impact of the new agreement when it comes to city expenses. So that's where we're at on this contract. I think there were a couple other questions.
Well,
in there.
let me
What
pause
did I
right there.
miss? Oh,
By no means is my intention to get in the weeds, right? So I don't want to get in the weeds of it, but I think it's really important for council to be informed and updated, because when something happens, then the questions are to the council members, and I think it's really unfair for us not to be armed with information. And if you just indicated, if we're paying the bills, then I want to know and have an understanding, who am I paying and when I'm getting out of it, right?
Yes, sir.
And I don't want to hear from them when there's a crisis, right? So I think it's really important that there's some communication, if not with the council, certainly at least with this committee.
yes, sir. Your last question, I believe you were referring to the Management Partners report.
Yes.
So the Management Partners report is out, or the deliverable that they provided is out. The manager had made the commitment to come back to committee, city council, and the MTC in March. So we are planning that to give you an update on, a refresher on what Management Partners found, but as well, on top of that refresher, what we have done really over the last 90 days at that point to address those items, or to start to address those items, and what our plan is. And honestly, some of the things that were brought up or identified in Management Partners, there will be short, mid, and long term. So my goal as interim is to address those things that are short term quickly, but then to lay out a strategic plan for the mid and long-term implementation so that the next CEO has a roadmap, right? They're not having to start fresh to figure out how to address those concerns.
Yeah, that's more than appropriate, and again, not getting in the weeds, but certainly I think it's a responsibility of this committee over the next year and a half to really get a good understanding of what's happening in transit as we identify a new director, as we kind of look at the findings in the report. I think that there were some that stuck out to me that needed at least a conversation, and certainly the relationship we have with our partner who's running our bus system. I think council, by way of this committee, really needs to be a little bit more engaged and involved, at least in terms of getting consistent updates.
So, Mr. Graham, I agree with that. The only caveat I would mention is this structure exists the way it does because city employees can't unionize.
I understand.
And so we want to be sure that we have an important distinction between these people and others. So I don't disagree with anything you said, but that's the sensitivity. Technically speaking, we have a contract which is overseen by Mr. Cagle, and he is answerable to us. It's a little bit like we have a contract, I believe, for collecting recycling with an outside firm, and we've never heard a report from them either. So absolutely, and particularly in light of all the publicity and the difficulties we've seen and the safety issues for the drivers, we need to involve ourselves or be informed, but we can't exercise any direct authority.
Yes, sir, I would agree with that. I will also say, from a safety standpoint, my view on safety is that is CATS, City of Charlotte, CATS department is responsible for protecting our employees, our contractors, and our customers. We take that seriously, and I will say you will see increased spending on elements of safety, security, training in our budget as we work through the budget workshops, both with City Council and then with the MTC.
Mr. Winston.
Thank you. To kind of carry on with Mr. Graham's line of commentary and questions, and I think we were caught between a couple different hard rocks and hard places over this past year. As the council wanted to kind of look more into our relationship with RAPD Dev, it was during a negotiation, so it was a difficult place for us to kind of reaffirm or change some of our priorities with that relationship. I think even before RAPDev or as this RFP is going out, it might be a good opportunity for council to affirm, reaffirm, or change what our values are, what our priorities are, what we would like to see in that relationship, with a bus operator in general. For instance, if we do want them to come to us at some point in time, that should be in the contract, right? That's something that we could say. I think this is the opportunity to meet with CATS, with the legal team, to determine how we can best do that. And I think that is a council-wide priority. On another hand, obviously the relationship is complicated because of, further complicated because of the way our transit system is governed and the MTC, right? This is something, as we can continue to think regionally and we continue to figure out how to solve these problems regionally, this might be a good opportunity as well to see how we interface with the MTC, right? Because this bus contract, this bus operator contract is something that does affect the towns. So how can we, as a region, as a county, affirm the priorities for changing needed in a bus system in this upcoming contract? And it seems like now that this is ratified, this is, and this RFP is coming out, that's the time to do it. So maybe there's a process we can come up with pretty quickly to see how we effectively do that. Just my suggestion.
It is the Charlotte area transportation system, so it's CATS, and service outside of Charlotte is governed by interlocal agreements, so it would all be in the confines of a contract structure. I was actually interested to look up RATP and see what it stands for. Does anybody on the committee know? No. It's Régie Autonome des Transports Parisiens. And this is the Paris Transport Authority, which has developed a large international business advising and managing on behalf of other cities.
Je ne sais pas.
Yeah, oui. Bon, monsieur. So we were going to talk about boards and commissions at this meeting, and I decided it would be a better idea for us to do it next month when all the other committees are doing it, partly because I really would like to coordinate with the county on those boards and commissions that are operated jointly by us and them. So therefore, we do not have another agenda item. It's early still if you want to talk about something else. Yeah. Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Well, you guys
Oh, I'm sorry. Second. All in favor? Yeah, aye. We're done. Thank you.